In ministry, we often learn and grow as the years go by. And so today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to share with you 3 things that I wish I knew about planting a church before we actually planted a church.
Welcome back to Practical Church Planting, where in 15 minutes or less, we'll give you practical tips, advice, and encouragement to help you plant and grow healthy churches. My name is Brian Drozia, and joining me today is Dylan Dodson. Hey, Dylan.
Hey, Brian.
Hey. And today we're going to give you 3 things that and by I mean Dylan, wishes that he understood before planting a church.
That's right. Things I wish I understood. Here's the thing.
That's right.
So New City's 2.5, almost 3 years old next April. But if you take, the pre-launch, all that sort of thing, it's been a few years. And so, like anything, after a while, you can look back and reflect with all of your sage wisdom.
You sure can.
I don't know.
Part of the sage wisdom is we just recorded this episode and none of the audio recorded. So we'll repeat our sage wisdom.
Yes, and it's going to be twice as good for you guys as we really developed what I have learned. And so here are 3 things. I mean, there's lots of things that you would learn and do differently.
Of course, thousands of things.
But there are 3 things in particular. As I was meeting with a church planner here in our area a couple weeks ago, we were talking about these things, and I was like, well, let's make a great church planning episode. So let me just share some more.
Funny how that works.
And if you're a new church planter, hopefully these are helpful. If you have been doing this for a while, you might be like, I totally understand.
I feel you.
So here's number 1. The first thing is this, that it takes years to build trust and relationships. I remember the first year, even the first 2 years of New City, being kind of confused at times, being like, how come people don't ask to meet, not that I am special or whatever, but as the pastor, why don't people ask to meet with me as much, have questions for me as much, especially when you come from other churches that have been around for a while, and it seems like there's a strong relationship with the people there and the staff, and there's deep ties, all these sorts of things. I'm like, what's going on? And then I realize it now, a few years in, that what we're going to say in this episode is probably encouraging and discouraging at the same time, especially as a church planter. Is that relationships and trust take time to build, no matter how great a preacher you are, no matter how charismatic you might be. In order for people to learn and to trust and to know you and to know the church, you can't rush these things. And so when people are joining a church plant for the first time, they don't know you, the pastor, they don't know each other, they haven't done life together, they haven't celebrated things and been hurt. And so it takes time to build relationships and trust where people will start to actually open up about what's going on in their life. Because even if you're the most caring and loving guy in the world, it takes time for people to actually believe that to be true. And so I would say I've had a lot of frustrations, the first 2 years of, I thought things would be different, or how come people aren't acting here as I've seen in previous churches. And that's because those churches have been around for a while, and those relationships between the pastor and the people had spent years developing. And you can't rush those things. And so the encouragement is, you might be frustrated that maybe some relationships aren't as deep, or maybe people don't feel as bought in as you think they should in the beginning. The encouragement is that necessarily is not all on you. The discouragement is it just takes time for people to say, this is my church, this is where I call home, these are my people, and you just can't get that overnight.
Yeah, I think this can be said about a lot of things in church planning. Things just take longer than you think they will.
Yeah.
We were saying, we're 2 and 3/4 years old, and this isn't to say is a negative thing or time's been dragging, but it feels like we launched forever ago. It does not feel New City doesn't feel new anymore. Right. It just seems like this is our church, and it has been for a long time, but it takes time to become it. So basically when you're going through it, or when you're early on, or even now or whatever, these things that seem like they should be coming very quick, the church we grew up in, or church I grew up in, has been around since the 50s. There are these things that have always been, it seems. Right. And so being only around for 2 years, it seems like there's things that should be happening right away. It takes time. And that's fine. It's not a negative thing for it to take time, but in the grand scheme of things, 2 years is no time at all. Right. And so these things that, it just takes time to develop, and that's fine.
You're young when you still use halves and 3/4. My daughter's 4.5. She's very clear.
Oh, yes.
When you get older, that goes away.
Point,
but we're 2.5. We're 2 and 3/4.
2 and 3/4.
Which, it feels like nothing, but at the same time, it feels like it's been forever.
Yeah.
And part of that is just for our people too that have been here for a while. It just takes time for people's commitment to be there, for people's buy-in to be there, and for your relational connection to take place. And so all that to say is that you just can't rush these things, and you have to be patient on those things. And there's nothing you can do to rush it when you're starting a brand new church.
Yeah.
So that's number 1. It takes years to build trust in relationships. Some things just will not happen overnight. It's not necessarily all on you. Here's a second thing: that newness will create excitement for a while, but vision is needed to sustain it. Brian, what did you say the first run through that we recorded this episode?
I don't have the slightest clue.
You said it was like tweetable.
Oh, it's tweetable. Yeah, that's a tweetable quote. Still can't forget it.
That's right. Here's about a year or so ago, I remember reading some statistics on like pastors, and I don't even know how this came to be or why I was on this topic, but I found that the average pastor is at a church for 3 years, and 5 years was like stretching it on average. But the average church is there for 3 years, and I remember thinking like, why is that the case?
Yeah.
And you kind of read the reasons for it, and it's like, okay, that's weird. But now that New City's almost 3 years old, if you include the launch phase, it's been 3 years.
Yeah.
Some of the people have been around for 3 years. Now that I've actually understood like why that is, because after 3 years, you're not the new shiny object. Neither is the church the new shining object. People have been around. People have been hurt. Things have gone well. Things haven't gone well. And what I've experienced, at least at New City, and I think a lot of churches could say this, whether it's a brand new pastor at a church that's been around for a while or just a brand new church altogether, is that there's an excitement when things are new, and there's kind of a wave of excitement that you can and you should ride. But after a while, when the excitement dies down, there has to be something that people are bought into and are doing, because the newness doesn't stay forever.
Yeah.
And now that we're about 3 years old, like a couple months ago, I started to like feel this for the first time. It's like, oh, this like, you can no longer say, hey, we're new, like join us because it's the beginning or all that sort of thing. Like there has to be a reason. There has to be a mission that people are bought into and are pursuing that can't just be we're new, because the newness goes away. And then this is when things can fall apart, when churches can become stagnant because they weren't intentional on their goal or on their vision. They were just kind of riding this wave of newness. And when the newness wears off, the pastor leaves or the church stops being as missional as it was in the past.
It is so easy, not a good word, but it's so easy to get everyone excited about launch. Like launch is exciting, like not just for the pastor, but for everybody. Like it's exciting to launch. That launch Sunday is awesome, but it's like a few months later, this is like,
it's our church now.
Like this is just normal. Like this isn't this new exciting thing. It's just like, this is where we go on Sundays. And so it's very easy for that excitement to, like, I think if you're not intentional about it, that excitement can really take like a nosedive in a negative way. Like this can almost turn into like, this is kind of a drag. Like that was so exciting. This compared is like, stinks. Like, you know, and so and you're gonna have a handful of those, like we were talking before, we're moving soon. You know, we're moving to a new building in a few months, and like that'll be exciting. Like that'll be like we're having a launch day for it, and that'll be awesome. But then in 6 months or 3 months, 6 months, a year, that's just our building. Like that's not going to be the new exciting thing anymore. That's just like where we are. And so it's really easy to like hit these peaks and then like plummet to these valleys. But like it really does take vision to like, this week may not be an exciting week. Like this might not be like the launch of a series or we have this big exciting thing planned. But like if you don't, you know, if you're not intentional about like casting vision and making it clear, like we're here not just for these exciting weeks, but we're here for the mission. Then you can actually like sustain, not like sustain these like super high peaks where you're always going to be excited every week, but people can like, I know why I'm coming back, and I'm here, and I'm happy to be here, and this isn't just like a slump. Yeah,
but as we were talking about, you should ride the wave of we're new. If you're a new church plant, you should use that language. It should be exciting, but in the back of your head, you should be planning like, if you're a new church plant, assume you've been around for 5 years, what would you be saying is the reason people should join into what you're doing? Like I remember when our first 6 months, even up to the first year, I could get away with saying like, hey, when I'm talking to new people, like there's nothing quite like being part of something from the beginning. Well, I can't say that anymore. Like it's just not. And so what would you say if you could not use the reason that we're new as a reason for people to come and check out and be involved in what you're doing? What would that reason be? Find out what your church is existing for and like what it is you want to accomplish and what it is your unique mission that God has for you and your church, and start developing that now so that when the newness wears off, it's not like, well, now what do we do? That there's always something that you guys are working towards and trying to accomplish and implement, because the newness does not last forever.
And I don't think this is like anything what I'm going to say is anything like groundbreaking, but like if you haven't planted yet and you're getting ready for launch, like what are all your conversations with people? Is it all just around like launch day is going to be sick? Like this is just going to be so, this thing is going to be so exciting, and you know, people are going to come and like all this thing around this one thing, or are we talking about what the church is going to be? And like hopefully that's not this groundbreaking thing. Hopefully that's what you're actually doing, but I think that can really tell of what things, like kind of predict a little bit of how things are going to go. If you're so wrapped up about this event, whether it's launch or moving or new pass, whatever it is, if you're so wrapped up about this one event that everything else is kind of falling by the wayside, I think you can kind of predict that, like, after that, people are going to get kind of disappointed at what turns out.
And you got to be careful here, because it's like what it's saying, like whatever you attract people with is what you got to keep them with. So you need to be like, the new thing is exciting, but if that's all you talk about and then the newness wears off, then people are like, well, then now what do we do? Because the newness was just the main and only driving force behind what you're doing. And so again, I would just say newness will create excitement for a while, but you need vision to sustain it. If you could take the new factor away, what would you be saying and doing to get people on board and on mission?
Yeah.
That's number 2. And then lastly, I would say this is that you can't rush preaching development. I remember even like up to the first like 18 months of our church, literally while I was preaching, be so frustrated that like I was not doing well in something that I've been trying to do better at.
Yeah.
And before we launched, I mean, I had never preached weekly anywhere, so this was like the first significant time. And we talked about this in other episodes, but especially as a church plant, you got to like kind of play to your strengths, and it's easy to compare. And especially if you're part of a church or a larger church and the preaching was really good, you can think like I used to think like the people are only going to show up or get connected if my preaching is good.
Yeah.
And when it comes to a church plant, that is not a top priority of why people join a church. Now, to grow it and the larger your church becomes, like the more that matters. I mean, preaching always matters, but you know what I mean? Like, but in the beginning, like that's not the reason. And so you can get discouraged trying to compare yourself to whoever you think is awesome in your town or whatever, but that's not where people are coming anyway. And just knowing like you should learn and develop and find things to work on, but it doesn't happen overnight. It just takes time. And even, so, I mean, it's better now. Like there's still things where I'm like, yeah, I want to get better at that, or that wasn't that good, but at least it's not happening in the sermon anymore.
Yeah.
And I just know, just because it's been 3 years preaching, you know, almost every week, that you can't rush preaching development, and it's not all on how great a preacher you are as to whether or not people will come back.
Yeah, there's tons of resources out there, like there are books and things to listen to of how to preach better, how to and like good things and how to get better at your craft.
What's a good one, Brian?
There's a really good one. It's called Practical Preaching.
Where can you find it?
Yeah, on our YouTube channel we have a course, Practical Preaching course we did like a year ago.
And how much is it?
It is free.
Free 99.
Free 99. Yeah.
Yes.
Free plus tip. But no, seriously, yeah, it's a good resource, and there's a lot of good resources out there, but like they take time to implement, and so like utilize free. Like you should be trying to get better. You should be trying to improve your craft. And preaching is like we're almost saying it's not important, but we're not. Like it is really important, and so you should be trying to get better and not like just settle for I'm not very good, whatever. But it takes time, and that's fine. Like I one thing I've tried to tell myself is like I don't preach every week. I preach pretty rarely, and so I'm still overanalyzing everything I do pretty much from when I preach. And so I remember the last time I was up here preaching during I think it was during the second service. I have water with me, and so I go and take a drink of water, and you like every drink of water, especially in the beginning, feels like it's like 5 minutes long. And so I kept going to take a drink, but not actually doing it because like I'd have a thought and I'd want to say that thought, or I'd think it was going to take whatever. And I didn't realize this until afterwards. Adam, who's on staff here, came up to me and he's like, you never took a single drink that entire message. I was like, what? I was like, I picked it up like probably 15 times, but I guess I just picked it up and kind of waved it around and then set it back down. But like I would have these thoughts of like every little thing is going to make or break the message. And I think it's so easy to have that in the beginning. So I started telling myself, which probably isn't really a good thing, but kind of just to kind of temper my not nerves, but like temper my expectations of what people are going to take away, is like in 2 weeks, what of this message are people going to remember? And hopefully something, probably maybe not, but I mean like hopefully a bottom line or the text, or hopefully something's taken away from it. But like if I took too long on this sip, are people going to care in 2 weeks? I mean, in reality, no one cares right now, but like, especially going out that far, they might not even remember that it was me that preached. Or like if I stuttered over a couple words, or if these little mistakes happen, like, is it really going to matter in a couple weeks? And in reality, it just isn't. And so like, you're going to make mistakes. It's fine.
Yep. And so when we say like work on preaching, like you should be intentional, listen to people, take online courses, read books about it, and focus on one or two things at a time. And it takes months of preaching every week. I remember I like to use this analogy because I'm not an athlete and I probably always want to be, But you talk about like any professional athlete, especially like their rookie year to their second year or their second year to the third year, they'll talk about how like the game seems to slow down.
Yeah.
And that's the best way I can describe it. Probably at one point last year, it felt like things like actually slowed down for me. Because if you haven't preached a lot, you're really anxious, you're really nervous. Everything seems to take like 10 years. Like if you can't find a Bible passage or having a drink of water, and then you realize that's not how people that are listening, like they're not thinking like, what are you doing every half a second? And so when things began to slow down, I was able to focus and get better and improve. But that only happened with experience. And so even if you find like one particular area of preaching you want to get better at, focus on it. But it takes experience. You can't just read about it and the next Sunday be good at it.
Yeah.
It takes time and experience. And so don't get too discouraged. Be intentional about getting better, but just know that you can't rush it overnight. And the good news is, especially if you're a church planter, that's not the primary reason people are coming to your church, is because you're an amazing preacher.
I mean, if your hospitality is no good, if people aren't welcoming, if people aren't developing friendships, you can be the greatest communicator in the world. No one's going to come back. Like it's especially, like I said, especially in a church plant, it's kind of far down the list of why people come back. Like people come back for other people, and the preaching they tolerate if it's no good, you know?
Exactly.
It's the way it is.
So those are 3 things I wish I understood. I had a better idea before we planted a church. Thanks for listening today, and we'll be with you next time on Practical Church Planting. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Practical Church Planting. Whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Practical Planting, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you like or subscribe or do whatever it's telling you to do or should do on that platform.
And hey, if you are so tired of looking at our ugly faces, but you're not tired of listening to our beautiful voices, then you can find our podcast if you just search Practical Church Planting on iTunes or Google Play. Make sure not to just find it, not just to listen, but to subscribe.
Make sure you subscribe. Brian, tell them to subscribe.
Subscribe.
See you next time.